Imagine yourself back in 1971 when some of these pictures were taken. There were no mobile phones, no home computers, no home videos, no CDs and no DVDs. There were just vinyl LPs, cassette tapes were fairly new, and the number of TV channels had only recently gone up from 2 to 3. How different life was not so very long ago. Now let's go back some 30 years and make our way to the present. Early in the 20th century, Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss philosopher, had a dream in which he dreamt Liverpool was the pool of life. Our pool of life is Williamson Square. In the mid-70s, it was a lively centre for entertainment and trade and a good place for sitting and watching the world go by. The square is in the heart of Liverpool. These scenes show a typical day in the square in which you will find familiar figures from the past. Harry Benton was a regular entertainer with his favourite song, Martha, Rambling Rose of the Wildwood. He appeared at the Argyle Theatre, Birkenhead, and because of his popularity was given a spot at a local club for a time. Here's another regular selling jumping beans and other novelties. The Merseyside PTE band played regularly. Originally, they were the Liverpool Passenger Transport Band. Punch and Judy, run by the Codman family, had been part of the Liverpool scene since Victorian days. It had its origins in Italy. Catholic Action held meetings in different parts of the city, including the Pier Head. It was especially favoured by the older generation. Children used the escalators from the overhead walkway as a play area. Barrel organ Phil from the Burnley area travelled all over the northwest. Many people enjoyed seeing traditional English Morris dancers who took up almost the whole square. Exhibitions and campaigns would be centred here from time to time. Sometimes it would be a large exhibition like Save the Planet. There were plenty of seats to help you relax and see what was going on. A free show. By the 90s, all the seats had disappeared and there was nowhere to sit and watch the world go by. Father and son pack away Punch and Judy after a long day, but whatever happened to Mr. Punch? The show has been around for nearly 150 years. The son in the picture is now Professor Codman, who carries on the business.
My great-grandfather brought the Punch and Judy show into Liverpool in 1860. And of course in those days they were always sited between, well, near a marketplace before seaside ever developed. So there was a piece of land called the Quadrant, which was designated solely for the Punch and Judy show. There were still a lot of people that would emerge from the railway station and the marketplace. It was a focal point, and they all emerged onto that particular point. Now it stood there until 1957, when the city began to change, and the second site was called the Plateau, which is St George's Hall. It wasn't a very viable site, really, because people had to climb steps and things like that. And then the third site was Williamson Square, which was an ideal spot. Traditionally, we use the dog Toby in the past, but of course these days, with politically correctness, etc., we don't use them. By 1980, the pace of life was quicker, and of course people would not stop at the particular time they stopped in the early days. So now we are sited down here at the Museum of Liverpool Life, where performances are given either holidays or weekends. People often ask me how the voices are done, but of course I keep that to myself because it's a trade secret.
Hopefully, Professor Codman's son will take up the family tradition and keep Mr. Punch performing into the 6th generation of the family.
You don't shout like that. It's not yes, it's no. Whether his mother would let him on.
By the early 60s, traffic congestion had become so bad in Queensway Tunnel between Birkenhead and Liverpool that a new one was planned linking Wallasey and Liverpool. The first of 2 tubes was ready in 1971, and on the 27th of June of that year, the public were allowed to walk through before vehicles were admitted. This was a tradition set not only when Queensway was opened by King George V in 1934, but one which goes back to the opening of the Mersey railway tunnel in 1886. The Queen dedicated the new road tunnel to her father, naming it Kingsway. After the walk, people completed their journey to the starting point by bus and ferry. A memorable day out for many. Another tradition was the Liverpool show in Wavertree Playground. A wide variety of action was featured. Here we have the dog show with many proud owners. Who were the more proud, the dogs or the owners? It was also a horse show with competitions and displays. In 1974, an old Liverpool tram, known to many as a Green Goddess, was on display. It was introduced to Liverpool tracks in the early 1930s and is owned by the National Museums and Galleries of Merseyside. It's likely to be refurbished at the new Heritage Tramway in Birkenhead by members of the Merseyside Tramway Preservation Society. In 1974, Liverpool FC won the FA Cup and it was displayed at the show. On arrival back in the city, crowds turned out to welcome the team home as the players were paraded round the city on an open-top bus. Good viewpoints were taken wherever they could be found. On top of the bus were veteran manager Bill Shankly with the then current manager Bob Paisley. Good viewpoints were taken wherever they could be found. Fans of all ages gathered. Football is a religion in Liverpool, whether you support Liverpool or Everton. The Liverpool Echo sponsored an air display over the Pier Head which attracted big crowds. As well as old aircraft, modern airliners were diverted from their normal routes to take part. Finally came a display by the Royal Air Force. How many remember the old Mersey Railway underground station of Liverpool Central, terminus of the old Mersey Railway from Birkenhead to Liverpool? Remember how dark and damp it was, and remember the old departure indicators showing order of departure for Rock Ferry, New Brighton and West Kirby. It closed in 1975 to allow new loop and link lines to be constructed to bring together the separate suburban railways into one network. The new brand name, Merseyrail, was established about 1971. In 1977, the first train for Wirral entered the new loop system. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the Lord Mayor and other dignitaries joined the train for its inaugural run. Not all the stations were yet open. A new control room opened for the loop and link system. From now on, Merseyrail would be a true network. Many will remember the old landing stage at Liverpool Pier Head. It was always a hive of activity as boats to 3 destinations arrived and departed at very frequent intervals. It was also a place to stroll and view ships at close quarters. By the mid-70s it was time for it to be replaced. Shortly after installation, a combination of high winds and tide allowed water to seep through a weak part of the hollow structure and it sank. Repair work soon got underway. Eventually, it was ready just in time for the Queen's visit in Silver Jubilee year. Crowds gathered at the Pier Head as the Queen made a tour of the Mersey on the Royal Iris. The Royal Yacht Britannia was berthed at the new stage. The Queen, wearing a pink outfit, arrived at the stage to the delight of the patiently waiting people. By the early 70s, work on the marathon job of constructing the Anglican Cathedral was nearing completion. Stone was cut and taken from Woolton quarries to the cathedral site. In the early days, it would have been horse-drawn transport. The best pieces were chosen. In the workshops, stonemasons worked on the stone, cutting it with the use of templates to give the final shapes and sizes. In these latter days of building, more modern tools could be used compared to 1904 when construction began. Working on top of the cathedral was a tricky, cold and windy job for much of the year. Today, workers would have to wear hard hats and protective clothing, but even as late as the 1970s, that was not even considered. By October 1978, work was finished in time for the Queen to officially mark its completion. What a contrast it was to that day in June 1904 when Edward VII laid the foundation stone of what was to be a 74-year project designed by the young architect Giles Gilbert Scott and spanning the reigns of 4 monarchs. The 24th of October 1978, and the Queen, dressed in royal blue, mounted the steps and entered, thereby celebrating the completion of one of the biggest cathedrals in the world. Church Street Christmas. Church Street is always decorated for Christmas. In 1977, the Merseyside Passenger Transport Band was playing. Traditional displays added to the atmosphere. Striking firemen appealed for funds. The crib was where it has been year after year. Church Street at Christmas today is a little more boisterous than it was 25 years ago. "Rocket is here" was the slogan to celebrate 150 years of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. The original rocket was displayed in the Transport Gallery of the Liverpool Museum. Hornby, originally a Liverpool company, made a large-scale steam-driven model for the occasion. As celebrations built up, other souvenirs were made, including the usual specially printed mugs. British Railways celebrated with a large-scale parade of locomotives through the years. It was held over 3 days and known as Rocket 150. The highlight was a replica rocket, whilst the world's oldest locomotive, Lion, from the original Liverpool and Manchester Railway, had to help some of the other replicas. As part of the celebrations, the Edge Hill Trail was opened. And here you could see the remains of the steam cable haulage system that brought trains up the very steep slope from Lime Street Station, with which early steam locomotives couldn't cope. Here too are the remains of the famous Moorish arch. In 1981, the nation celebrated the royal wedding of Prince Charles and Diana. People all over the country celebrated with street parties and dances. Here in Litherland, the inhabitants of 3 different streets had their own street parties. After the children were fed, it was time for the adults to satisfy their hunger. At nearby St Paul's Church Hall, celebrations carried on into the evening. And during the evening, Charles and Diana lookalikes called in and sat on their specially constructed throne. Not only did they celebrate in Litherland, but so did the whole nation. In the early 80s, the long-established black community in Liverpool took part in a West Indian parade. This was something that would grow in later years. Liverpool Horse Parade 1985. The famous May Day horse parade ceased with the outbreak of the Second World War and never restarted. In the mid-80s, an attempt was made to re-establish it. Sefton Park was the gathering point of horses and carriages of all types. Just like the dogs earlier, much time was spent by the owners grooming their horses. The animals and various types of vehicles were of great interest to the general public. Once underway, the parade went via Park Road, Hardman Street, Renshaw Street and Lime Street to St George's Hall. Waiting for them at their lineup was Brian Jakes of BBC Radio Merseyside and children's book fame. Unfortunately, the revival didn't last many years and had to stop due to lack of funding. Maybe it will return one day. Following the Toxteth riots in the summer of 1981 and the formation of the Merseyside Development Corporation by the government, planning for the International Garden Festival began later that year. All of the South Docks were to be refurbished, with the worst 250 acres of land allocated for the Garden Festival. The designated land was poisoned earth with a disused dock, oil jetties and storage tanks. Locally, it was known as the Cast Iron Shore. 2.5 years were given for the transformation into a lush garden. Some thought it would be impossible, but it was achieved in time, thanks to all the dedicated people involved, for the Queen to officially open the festival in May of 1984. It was the biggest event in Britain since the Festival of Britain in 1951. Not only were there 58 international and national gardens, but there were miniature railways, special events and activities every day for 6 months. Wurzel Gummidge, alias John Pertwee, was a popular TV character at the time. The Victorian lady sat in the Victorian garden and talked to visitors. There was entertainment of all kinds. The Yellow Submarine was a tribute to the Beatles. Many were confused by the wonderful maze. Tom Murphy's statue of John Lennon was a landmark. This system of reclamation had been used in Germany since 1952. In Britain, this was a first, and it achieved international status. The target of 3 million visitors was exceeded. Most importantly, it was a glorious summer, except on the day the tall ships departed, when, alas, torrential rain fell. In 1984, the Cutty Sark Tall Ships race finished in the Mersey for the first time. In spite of torrential rain, it was estimated that over 1 million people witnessed their departure. New Brighton and Wallasey on Wirral were cut off by the sheer number of cars. Spectators were still jammed in hours after the departure of the ships, but the chip shops did good business. We shall see better images of the tall ships when they visited again in 1992 and the weather was sunny. The Mersey Railway sign still shows on the tower of Birkenhead Central. This model reflects the early electric days underground stations with American-style electric trains which lasted into the 1950s. The first line opened in 1886 between Liverpool James Street and Green Lane near Camel Aird's Birkenhead. Steam traction almost suffocated many people, and in 1903 it became the first railway in England to be electrified. Extensions were built to Rock Ferry and Birkenhead Park. There was also an old Leyland Lion bus reenacting the short-lived bus service from Rock Ferry to Port Sunlight, which enabled Liverpool people access to Lever Brothers at Port Sunlight for work. There was also an exhibition of rolling stock. Optimistic future destinations were displayed on trains. Skelmersdale is still not part of the network. The preserved Liverpool Southport electric train also ran. Bold Street was the first street to be pedestrianised. In the 80s, it was probably at its lowest ebb, with about half the shops closed. Since then, there's been a vast improvement, with most shops full. In Church Street, pedestrianisation brought planted areas and seats to the streets. In those days, there were no trader stalls. What was it like before pedestrianisation? Outside Woolworths, there was a wide pedestrian crossing. Scores of green buses used Church Street. It was in Church Street that Frank Winfield Woolworth opened his first European store in 1909. A haven of peace is the rear garden in Bluecoat Chambers, one of Liverpool's oldest buildings. From within the walled garden, you'd never guess you're within a short distance of a busy city centre. On a warm summer day, many office and shop workers can be seen having their lunch. Since the early 90s, 1 million daffodils have been planted in Sefton Park by Liverpool Environmental Services in the name of Marie Curie Cancer Care. It's worthy of William Wordsworth, who, no doubt, would have called them a host of golden daffodils. They're now well established and give colourful displays every spring. We never see fog these days, or do we? Occasionally we do, but nothing like the poisonous smogs of the 40s and 50s. To see a foggy day in Liverpool towards the end of the 20th century is quite unusual. As the morning rolled on, the sun gradually broke through and familiar scenes emerged from the mist, and the November afternoon was pleasantly sunny. Fireworks in Salthouse Dock were a first, and they heralded Christmas shopping in Albert Dock in the early 90s. After the first shopping sector of the Albert Dock opened in 1984, other sectors gradually opened, including the Tate Gallery and the Merseyside Maritime Museum. By the turn of the century, most of the South Docks had been renovated, with new housing, industrial units and a marina, a city within a city. "500 years after Columbus discovered America in 1492, the tall ships race was run in his honour and finished in the Mersey after journeys from Portugal and Italy via Spain, Puerto Rico, Boston and New York. The King of Spain was patron, and he visited Liverpool to see the finish of the race and attended an open-air concert in his honour. It was one of his ancestors who gave Columbus the necessary support so long ago. The large ships were berthed in Birkenhead, Head, the largest gathering of sail training ships in the world. We'll go aboard the Gloria, a Colombian naval training ship. The smaller ships were based in the Albert Dock area. Tradewind is a topsail schooner from New Zealand. In the 19th century, Liverpool was known as the Port of 1,000 Masts. Early morning on the 12th of August 1992, and the tall ships assembled upriver of the Pier Head. We pass near Krusenstern, the winner of the race. The King of Spain's ship, the Juan Sebastian, is in mid-river. Overhead, we're treated to a wonderful display of aerobatics prior to departure. Juan Sebastian leads the way. There goes Gloria, which we boarded earlier. Boa Esperanza, a replica of Columbus's original ship, passes close by. The rest follow. It's goodbye to the tall ships. Perhaps one day they will return. In 1994, Queensway Tunnel was 60 years old, and the Mayor of Wirral and the Lord Mayor of Liverpool met mid-tunnel to mark the occasion. "60 years earlier, Civic leaders met under the river on the tunnel breakthrough and shook hands through a hole in the rock.
To the Diamond Jubilee of the Queensway Tunnel, a marvel of engineering history and a pride of Merseyside, opened by His Majesty King George V on the 18th day of July in the year of our Lord 1934. May Queensway thrive for another 60 years. God save the Queen.
The meeting of the mayors signalled the start of a large vintage vehicle rally. Vintage vehicle owners were delighted with the opportunity to take part in such a large rally. Steam lorries were a common part of the scene in the 20s and 30s. Some were still running well into the 50s. Another event was the traditional walk-through, but this time it was different. The walk was just one way, and the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Carl Davis, played under mid-river. Another first for the Phil. The race on foot from the Liverpool Tunnel entrance to New Brighton attracted thousands of runners, some in fancy dress. 60 years of Queensway Tunnel would not be forgotten. In 1990, the QE2 visited the Mersey for the first time. It was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the first transatlantic liner service. In 1840, Samuel Cunard inaugurated the service with the steam sailing ship Britannia from Liverpool to Boston. The scene in those days was of frenzied activity, as among the travellers setting sail for the USA in the 100 years from 1830 to 1930 were 9 million emigrants. For the QE2, it was like a homecoming, as more than 1 million people welcomed her from the river banks, and Pier Head used to be the headquarters of the Cunard Company. The QE2 has since made a number of other visits, but the first was the most memorable. In July 1997, the replica of Captain Cook's HM bark Endeavour entered the Mersey for a short stay in Liverpool. The original was not a Royal Naval warship, but a sailing ship with a difference. She was specially purchased by the Admiralty for a voyage of exploration and scientific discovery for the Royal Society of London to make in the name of the King. The replica we see today was built in Australia, and after many false starts was finally commissioned in April 1994. On Cook's 3-year voyage he was accompanied by botanists, artists and an astronomer in order to collect, record and study samples of plants, animals and water life. Endeavour docked alongside the Merseyside Maritime Museum. It provided easy access for visitors wanting to learn something about life on board over 200 years ago. Can you imagine 94 people living together for 3 years in such cramped quarters? Today, there are usually no more than 56. After Endeavour left the Mersey, she journeyed home via other UK ports and America. In the distance are the Three Sisters power station chimneys, a landmark for decades on the waterfront. Having become outdated, it was time for them to go. Another landmark to disappear was the famous Cop. In 1974, the team played without a care as to the state of the accommodation. New regulations meant that the original accommodation was unsuitable. Unfortunately, for many supporters, nostalgic for the Kop, it had to go. A modern structure has taken its place and, in its turn, is a new landmark. Time to tidy up Liverpool, assisted by the Keep Britain Tidy campaign. Author Bill Bryson wrote, when he visited the city, that a festival of litter was taking place. Children were encouraged to take part. The Lord Mayor also encouraged adults to participate as they were drafted in from various organisations. A new state-of-the-art cleaning machine was introduced. Did the campaign work? The Lord Mayor's parade brought out the crowds and blocked the roads to traffic. It's an occasion to raise money for the Lord Mayor's charities. The Lord Mayor's coach was brought out of storage to give the public a chance to see it in all its splendour. The route took in Lime Street, St John's Lane, Victoria Street and then James Street to the Pier Head. At the Pier Head grandstand, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Margaret Clark, took the salute and reviewed the parade. The parade was very colourful, with the theme being Maritime City, and so some of the floats were appropriately boat-shaped. And another duty in the Lord Mayor's calendar was over. Another occasion when the city becomes crowded with people is the annual Matthew Street and Beatles Festival. In narrow Matthew Street it can be difficult to move, but the crowd is good-humoured and cheerful. North John Street is overflowing as people try to hear the groups. The top of a phone box makes a grandstand seat if you can get it. It's a good excuse for a booze-up as the pubs do record business. Castle Street in front of the town hall is full of spectators. Within Cavan Walks, classical musicians play alongside the Beatles statues. Every June, the annual River Festival takes place, largely based on the Albert Dock area and the Mersey. The annual Nobby race takes place. Nobbies are old preserved Lancashire coast shrimp boats that have been restored by members of the Nobby Association. They must leave the dock 2 hours before high tide and be back no later than 2 hours after the tide, otherwise the dock gates will be closed. The route takes them from Canning Dock Gates towards Garston, then across the river to nearby Eastham on Wirral, before returning to the Pier Head. Since EasyJet came to Liverpool Airport, business has grown significantly. From an airport handling around 500,000 passengers a year, it's now well on the way to 3 million. But let's look around the airport as it was in the early 90s, when it was handling light aircraft, post office traffic, and some scheduled and charter flights. Ryanair was the only budget airline using the airport and was for Dublin passengers. Remember the old duty-free? EEC rules no longer allow it unless you travel outside the EEC. Then there was the check-in and departure lounge. Growth has been such that a new airport terminal has been built over the old and given a new name. Further up the road, the old 1930s Art Deco terminal has been refurbished and extended as a Marriott hotel, complete with a replica Dragon Rapide outside, reminding people of times past. Almost next to the airport and in complete contrast is Liverpool's oldest building, Speke Hall. It's a 15th century half-timbered manor house run by the National Trust, 6 centuries older than its 21st century neighbour. To mark the long relationship between the Chinese community and the city of Liverpool, which has the oldest Chinatown in Europe, a new Chinese arch has been constructed on the fringe of Chinatown. Made in China, it was constructed on site.
Which is over there, and also down at the bottom of Nelson Street. Feel free to have a little look around Chinatown as well, but be back with me in around about 2 hours.
Good idea, yeah.
In February 2000, the Chinese community celebrated their new year, the Year of the Dragon.
afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an occasion that certainly I, and so the Chinese community and the whole of Liverpool has been waiting for a long time.
To end our review of the last 30 years of the century, let's take a look at just some of the activities in the city as we enter the year 2000, the last year of the millennium. It's good to look back at city life and learn from the past, and this series of videos has helped to preserve our memories. Liverpool is now looking forward to the many new opportunities that the first decade of the new century will usher in to our wonderful city.